Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Core Team Leading Skills 1. Are you Gordon Ramsay or Gandhi? Our presenter is Nicole Nash-Arnold. Nicole is a nursing career coach who helps great nurses transform into respected leaders. She shares her 15 years of experience in both senior and executive health leadership roles to germinate great leadership. Clinically, Nicole has over 10 years perioperative experience before moving into her nurse educator and management roles. She has postgraduate qualifications in perioperative nursing and currently a master's in nursing. Nicole is a member of the International Coaches Federation. Nicole, welcome to the microphone.
Thanks very much, Sue. Welcome to everyone who's here listening today. And today what we're going to be talking about are essential skills, and we're, like I did with challenging behaviours, we're going to do a series on some of the essential skills. And so this is sort of Team Leading 101. It's a topic that's incredibly close to my heart because I think as an industry we do an exceptional job of skilling nurses up clinically, giving nurses a variety of opportunities to develop wide-ranging skills and opportunities to move into different clinical areas. But once we have crafted our suite of clinical competence and expertise and have developed a wide range of those skills, whether that be in obstetrics or aged care or ICU or the operating theatre or community and domiciliary nursing, then all of a sudden our skill development stops. And so then we are left to our own devices in developing other skills such as team leading. And so those soft skills that we so urgently require, we don't necessarily get a lot of opportunity in developing those skills in. So we've got this great suite of clinical skills. The clinical green rises to the top, and then we have no support or opportunity in developing this new soft skill set. So the questions left to you in terms of now you're a clinical expert and you're left in charge of a whole load of people. And once upon a time I had someone classically say to me, so Nick, I could put a cannula in a peripherally shut down person in a tertiary referral ED hospital, and the next day it was up to me to plan, organise, coordinate, develop skills, mediate and negotiate. And he recognised that he had none of those skills at all, and it was incredibly stressful. So that's what I aim to do today. We're going to name the roles that we play that aren't clinical. And there are 10 of them. 10 of the roles that we play once we stop playing our clinical role, our purest nursing role. We're going to go through these roles because these roles suggest that a team leader bears a great deal of responsibility and burden, but to help you oversee that departmental statuses, systems and processes is something quite else. I aim to help you serve as a crucial information link between the department and the hospital or the health service, interpret and reflect those hospitals' core mission. Our core mission is to deliver patient care, but suddenly our role changes somewhat and we're required to do it quite differently. But we are still in a role that serves the hospital's core mission, and that is to deliver excellent patient care. And your role, once you're not just a purist nurse delivering patient care and now you're the team leader, to maintain stability over your departmental's operations and adapt in a controlled and balanced way to what can be a very changing environment. So we aim to develop your skills in that way to be a team leader and corral. Sometimes it is a little bit like herding cats, but nevertheless, it's the role that we take on, often whether we like to or we don't want to, we're asked to take it on. So we're going to delve into Minzenberg's management roles. And he defined about 3 categories. He wrote a book about the 10 management roles that we play. And he developed those actually in the 70s and published the book in the 90s. So he developed, of those 10 roles, he put them into 3 categories. There are 3 roles that we play that are interpersonal, 3 roles that we play that are informational, and 4 roles that we play that are decisional. As we progress, consider which of those 10 roles that we play that you are most comfortable and the roles where you are least comfortable. As you develop in your team leading focus, consider the areas where you are least comfortable, and they're the areas that you need to spend the most time. Even as we go through these 10, give yourself a score out of 1 to 5. And for those 5, the ones that you get 5 in, great, carry on, don't concentrate on those for now. But the ones that you're a 1 or a 2, then actively seek out opportunities. As we talk about each of the 10 roles, I'll talk about what that is, what it looks like, some examples where I think in my experience then people have shown that in hospital examples and health service examples, and then some areas where you might like to develop. So if you do happen to give your score a 1 or 2 out of 5, then start thinking about how you might use those examples of how to develop and how you might seek those out. So our first category that we're going to concentrate on are the 3 interpersonals. And the first of the interpersonal roles that we hold when we are acting in a team leader position is the figurehead. Now, as a team leader, once you take on that role as a team leader, you are essentially the manager, because your manager has delegated all of his or her roles to you. You are manager in absentia. So you are everything that manager should be, from probably 4 p.m. in the afternoon right through till 7:30 in the morning when your nurse manager arrives back. And of course 24/7 over the weekends. And sometimes when they're away sick, then you may find yourself in that numb role when they're off at conference, off at meetings all day, perhaps they're actually off sick, and if they're on annual leave for a short period of time, you become that figurehead. And what does that mean? As a legal authority in that hospital, then as the manager, then the figurehead has some roles to play. Often the manager is but a symbol, obliged to perform a number of duties. When one is a manager, one must preside at ceremonial events and sign various documents, receive visitors, make his or herself available for many of those who feel they must go straight to the top to get something done, or must deal with those people who believe that their issues deserve special attention. And so in that way, it's not too dissimilar to being quite a regal role, and that you are available only for the office that you hold. So for example, consider a patient in your ward and they're quite confused, but the patient's daughter comes in and is incredibly unhappy about the care. My mother hasn't received this. When was my mother fed? I don't understand why the doctor hasn't been in yet. I don't understand why we're not more quickly moving into another area, why I haven't been discharged, why I haven't seen the discharge planner. I put that piece of paper under my mother's sink yesterday and it hasn't been cleaned. I suspect you definitely know this family member. Now, this is a classic example of where you play the figurehead because this particular customer believes that they deserve special attention, and they are not going to accept you dealing with the nurse that's caring for them or anyone else in the ward. They want to deal with the figurehead. And so you carry out your regal responsibilities in being nothing much more than being present and engaged and listening. Also, consultant physicians are quite sure that they don't want to deal with just anyone on the ward. They want the nurse manager or his or her delegate to be doing ward rounds. So again, you play that role of the figurehead of the ward in that you are no more capable than anyone else of doing those ward rounds, but that's the person that they want. So in the duty that you are, in your regal responsibilities, you execute those. Sometimes ceremonially you may need to go to certain events, you may need to be present at certain events, and it is the nurse manager's responsibility to sign, say, the pharmacy order. You again are no more capable than any other registered nurse on the ward, but it is the role of the figurehead to execute that. Also, there are times where a figurehead must step up and be present by nature of the role that you play. So some time ago when I was managing the emergency department, I was, of course, in charge and in the department, and one of the nurses took one of our admissions up to the ward, and she got a very cold reception, in fact, arguably an aggressive reception, where the staff came barrelling up to her and said, "Oh, you ED nurses, all you do is the dump and run. You just dump our patients and you never really give us a proper handover, and we always do this, and they're never been given proper pain relief and never been properly assessed." And therefore was a litany of complaints about everything that the emergency department do and don't do. Now, Matilda cops, this particular nurse, copped a complete face ripping from this ward and came back and didn't want to engage in that discussion. From her point of view, it was well outside the scope of what she was used to dealing with, which was reasonable. So as the figurehead in that particular department, it was my role to step up and be the one that represented the unit as a whole. That the complaints were about ED and how we never did this or always did that. And so it was my responsibility as the figurehead to be able to call that person and say, "Would you like to talk to me about those complaints?" And I can listen and action where necessary. Now, I was the nurse manager at that time, but if I was just in charge after hours and not the nurse manager, then it would be my role to do that, to step up and be that broader person to take and have the broader shoulders to take that complaint, because it wasn't necessarily about that one individual. Apparently it was about the department as a whole. So sometimes you taking the weight of that sort of situation is the role that we may play as the figurehead. Now, if we started, you have given yourself more of a 1 or 2 out of 5 than a 5 out of 5 in this particular area, then there are a couple of areas you may want to consider developing. Now, figureheads are but a representative of your team, so you may need to build or improve your confidence in this area. Then start with your image or your reputation, because you are going to be taking a much bigger role, and so you need to build brand in your organisation. So knowing more people in the organisation outside your ward is going to be important. So knowing other clinical nurses in other wards, getting to know the after-hours coordinators, getting to know the other nurse managers, having some level of connectivity with the director of nursing would be advantageous, so that people know who you are and what you're about. It's somewhat about being a little bit more presidential and having more connections, and that will help you in this role of being a figurehead, as well as a couple of the other roles that we play. In terms of emotional intelligence skills that you might need to play the figurehead, sometimes it is one of humility and it is one of empathy. Sometimes it's just about saying to the person on the ward, "I actually understand that ED is bad news for you and we do nothing but bring you work, and sometimes high acuity work at the last minute of your shift when you've had a really terrible shift." So sometimes it's not about taking it on board and going, "We don't do that, we don't jump and run," but going, "I actually understand how we're bad news for you." And that's a place of humility, of not having to flare up and be defensive and just going, "Going to cop this one on the chin and let it go through to the keeper and ignore it," because this is not about us, it's about a much greater issue. It's also about setting a good example and being a good role model. So sometimes there have been times where I may not have respected my nurse manager as a person, but I did respect the office that she held. And that's what this is about, that you may not respect the team leader or that is in that position that you are dealing with, or the after-hours coordinator that you're dealing with in this role, but as a good figurehead, you respect the offices that they hold. And that you give them the respect that those officers hold even when they haven't earned the respect or the trust or the cooperation that is rightfully theirs given the office that they hold. So number 2 role that we play, also in the interpersonal, is the leader. Now this is where you provide leadership for your team, your department, or perhaps your entire organisation. And it's where you manage the performance and responsibilities of everybody in the group. Leadership describes the team leader's relationship with their subordinates, whether you're able to motivate them, develop them, and enrich them in the environment for the work that they do. Peter Drucker is a leadership author who has written a lot of books and is definitely a thought leader on the world of leadership. He's famously quoted as saying, management is about doing things right and leadership is about doing the right thing. So think about that for a while, because I think that's an excellent example of how you should discern between what's management and what's leadership. Management is about doing the roster and getting it out on time. Leadership is about having the emotional intelligence to be able to understand how you're going to put those people on the right time at the right place to deliver excellent patient care with skill mix in a very complex environment. So there are 2 ways to look at the roster. So when we're talking about the interpersonal role that you play as the leader, we aren't talking about the operational stuff, staffing, meal breaks, getting patients back from theatre. This is about the big things. Do you have the right skills allocated to the right patients when you're the team leader? Are you able to deploy your expert sense of clinical intuition to identify that all is not well with one of the patients of your, say, 30 in your post-op orthopaedic ward, even though you're not actually looking after them? Are you able to deploy your emotional intelligence to identify that your new grad is about to fall apart? Are you able to make decisions and communicate that in a way that is authentic to the person that you are? Now this is actually where I start talking a lot about whether you're going to be Gordon or whether you're going to be Gandhi. When I first started as a team leader, I remember at the same time there was a show on at the time, which was Jamie Oliver's 15, where he pulled homeless people off the street, gave them opportunities in his kitchen and turned many life around. But there was one particular scene in the kitchen where it was the classic commercial kitchen, and as lovely and affable as Jamie Oliver is, once he got into chef mode, then he was very back of house, very commercial kitchen, and it was very aggressive environment, as classic environments are for commercial kitchens. And he was swearing, he was barking orders. He suddenly turned into the Gordon Ramsay that we know and hate a lot of the time, where it was just a display of utter aggression, if not bullying. And I remember feeling at the time a sense of pressure when I was a new team leader. That's what I'm meant to be like. I'm meant to be not bully, but I'm meant to be aggressive, and I'm meant to give orders. I'm meant to be authoritative. I'm meant to be able to say, you will do this and it'll be my way or the highway. And I am not very good at conflict. So I found that really difficult. I adopted this persona of Gordon, a little bit of Gordon Ramsay, where I had to be this authoritative leader and bark orders of everybody, and there was no negotiation and there was no arguments. It was just, you will do this and you will do it now. But it wasn't remotely authentic to the person that I was. And so it was incredibly difficult for me to play that role. And so equally, I'm probably a bit more Gandhi and very, very passive, if anything, where I didn't like conflict. But over years, I found a way for me to be a leader and to be authentic and to be who I was and still be able to influence people and get people to do what I wanted them to do and be. And sometimes it had a lot to do with the things that, I am as a person. I used my sense of humour a lot. And I used quiet conversation about, look, this is the cold hard truth about my situation. This is what I'm trying to achieve. Can you help me? So I found a better way of being more Gandhi than Gordon. But passive wasn't the answer all the time either. So, for example, if you're a leader, new team leader to the ward and exploring your leadership style, then consider more deeply the grad who isn't coping very well. Now, the caretaker who just does the job and doesn't really give it much thought leaves a scrap of paper on the nurse manager's office to deal with it the next day and says, grad didn't cope. Whereas the leader takes action. You investigate, you sit down with the grad, you discuss it with him. You find out what it is that's making him not cope, and you can intuitively sense that he's about to fall apart. You probe, you have a look at where his work's up to, you find out that he's tail spinning out of control and that he isn't anywhere near up to date with his time management. You give a bit of education and you counsel and you make a firm request and give them very distinct feedback about what was good, bad and ugly. That's what the authentic leader does in the style that's right for you. And that may be a million different styles, but you still execute those same tasks. Or, as we've discussed in the last few weeks, the challenging behaviour. The caretaker ignores. The person who decides not to be a leader just ignores it. Whereas the leader embraces the opportunity for what it is, which is improvement. Now, if this is an area where you feel a little bit overwhelmed, you're giving yourself a 1 out of 2, not a 5, transformational leadership skills is an area for you to read up on. It's about creating a vision, delivering a vision, communicating that vision. What do you want for your people in your ward, for your patients? You want your patients that come in who are unstable with their angina, if you're working in a cardiac ward, they've had an MI, they're having investigations. You want them to go home to their pre-incident function, their pre-infarction function. You want them to go home and be on that journey. And so if that's your vision, everybody leaves here on a journey and they know what they need to do to get back to where they were, then that's what you're all about. That's your vision, and you communicate that vision. So when you challenge the behaviour, it's like, this is what we're about. We're getting people back onto the road to wellness. So let's do that. Let's not worry about the argument that you're having or the problems that you're having at home or the problems that you're having with your time management. Let's work together so that we can make sure that all of our patients are on the road to wellness when they leave us. Transformational leadership is about influencing, not demanding. It's about inspiring, not telling. It's about self-motivation, knowing who your people are to get the best out of them, following through, and most of all, it's just about communicate. One of the things which I'll talk about a little bit later is when you're a leader, whether you're a manager or a team leader, you're paid to think, you're not paid to do. So when you're running around taking OBS, taking patients to theatre, when you're on the phone following up a narcotic order, when you're doing things, then you're not actually present. You're not mindful so that you can have the ability to do the things that are right. You're just doing the right things. Now, number 3 in our interpersonal is liaison. That is your other task, is that you are a go-between. Team leaders must communicate with both internal contacts and external contacts. You need to be able to use your network effectively on behalf of your department, on behalf of your people, and on behalf of your patients. So you can use that laterally, horizontally, so with your fellow team leaders in other wards, or it can be about managing up and talking to your team, your after-hours coordinator, your nurse manager at home, or your staff, your subordinates. But ultimately, you are the go-between. This hinges on your ability to have excellent relationships so that you can sometimes rely on goodwill to get people to do things that they don't inherently want to do. Liaisons are about having healthy relationships that you can leverage, that reciprocate. They're a system of alliances that are 100% reliable and predictable for when things go south. So you're the go-between, for example, for when the new IV pumps are rolled out in the hospital and you've received the communication from your nurse manager that this is the first shift that they're going to be used. You've been having training, you're the super user, and now you need to be the liaison between the gap between competence with the pumps and complete information. No one's familiar with them at all. So you're their go-between. You're the one that is giving them the tips and the prompts and the how-tos and the fallback and the troubleshooting and the problem solving. You're that person that steps in to fill that gap at all times. Perhaps the after-hours coordinator says that she's absolutely desperate, and you're the team leader for the maternity ward, and the after-hours coordinator gives you a ring to say that the ED is an absolute disaster and you need to outlie some patients. One 98-year-old crumble, a 10-year-old appendix, a 42-year-old in chronic back pain, diarrhoea and vomiting, and a post-op bowel with TPN. Now, you're the team leader of a maternity unit. That's not going to go so well for you when you turn up to your midwives and say they're going to be looking after a 98-year-old crumble or a post-op bowel with TPN. So you are now the liaison. You are the go-between between managing what the hospital needs and these new patients need versus what your subordinates want and need. And you need to be able to manage that situation. Now, if this makes you go cold, then a couple of things to work on is your professional networking techniques. Having your professional networks is going to be essential because you'll be able to come up with many interesting solution to that problem, particularly with your 5 outliers, if you've got good relationships outside your own clinical environment, that you can call on the ward, the general ward that you know has got a gynae outlier and said, I'll take your gynae patient if you take my TPN. So those professional networking skills are going to be incredibly important. Understanding how people think. Now, I've done a webinar on difficult doctors, which can be used, the premise can be used for anybody that you come in contact with. The context of this particular webinar is doctors, but it can be used for anybody. But it decodes the preferences around how people think, and that can be really useful when you're the liaison and you're coming with bad news and you're trying to get people, influence people to do something they don't want to do. It's important to understand how people behave under pressure and how to turn a negative into a positive. So that cognitive restructuring of getting people to think differently about things is a skill, which I've also done a webinar on, which can be really important for you to be able to leverage how people can embrace something when you're putting them in that situation. So there are 3 interpersonals: figurehead, leader, and liaison. But next, we've got informational. Now, the informational activities relate primarily to the processing of information. When you're the team leader, you're the gatekeeper of information. And so those 3 roles manifest in 3 different ways. Number 1, the monitor. In this role, you seek out information that the hospital or the health service has. You look for relevant changes in the environment. You monitor your team, you monitor their productivity, and you monitor their well-being. You are constantly scanning your environment, whether that's the people, your equipment, your medical supplies, your drugs, your processes, your policies, the way in which the hospital is arranged. But you are constantly scanning and looking for opportunities for problems and opportunities for great things. In a sense, you are the nerve centre, you are the focal point, such that you are connected to every one of your team members and you are responsible for the flow of information out to them. You are the information generalist. Now, a very important distinction is that you are the generalist. Your team members are the specialists. They hold precise situational awareness that you're not across, but you have a précis of most of the situation. And that's a really important point, to not feel when you're the team leader that you have to be primary nursing 30 orthopaedic patients in the post-op ward. That's not your role. You're the generalist. You just have information across and you're scanning, and people need to escalate up to you the critical bits, but not the minutiae. You are not the holder of the minutiae. You are the holder of all of the key pieces of information. Your team members are the specialists. They know every nuance about what's happening with their patient. You don't. Also, as the team leader, you have connections externally as well, which your team members don't have. You're connected with other departments, with recovery, emergency, ICU, fellow wards, after hours coordinators. Each of those people that you're connected are the nerve centres for their departments. So those nodes, you're essentially the nerve centre node where you're connected to others who are then connected to their specialist. And that's how the information should flow. So you're responsible for monitoring and assessing a variety of inputs of information and constantly assessing what's that mean. Is this good news or bad news? Good news or bad news? Do I need to act or do I need to let it go through to the keeper? Now, for example, you might be the team leader, and what was a lovely even distribution of workload at the beginning, as you're sitting at the nurse's station, you're watching someone saunter down the ward as if they're heading for the pub, and another person's, Usain Bolt, sprinting up and down the ward like a hairy goat. So you're assessing that information to go, a pretty even distribution of workload. Why is someone it's calm that they're almost unconscious and someone else a hairy goat? So you're starting to stream information that now perhaps your acuity is rapidly changing. What does that tell you? Well, what do you need to do about it? Do you need a reassessment of your workloads? Perhaps the situation where the hospital is full and one of your other nodes, your after hours coordinator, comes to you and says, you have one bed available in the whole hospital and it's a telemetry bed. So you and the after hours coordinator make a plan for arrests overnight, that if someone needs an ICU bed that's full, you'll take an ICU patient into your telemetry bed and nurse them accordingly so that you can free up that bed. There's a flow of information. What you do with that is up to you. You need to make an assessment about whether you tell your team at this stage it's not relevant, but you're the holder of that information for when it becomes relevant. Now, if this is an area where you feel like you struggle a bit to be able to have that scan knowledge, that overarching knowledge about what's happening, then learning how to gather information effectively and overcome information overload. If you're someone that has to take information and isn't skilled at compartmentalising, streaming that information, discarding what's irrelevant to you, then developing strategies around compartmentalising what's important is going to be important. So there are lots of ways to do that. Now, to-do lists are actually a really good way of doing that so that you can prioritise. I've done some webinars on prioritising and how you can do that and how you can manage your time at this level when you're now the team leader as opposed to a clinical nurse. That can help you prioritise pieces of information and compartmentalise them. It's also important to be able to develop your ability to read quickly and process that material quickly so you can ditch what's irrelevant and keep what's important. And that can be important in lots of different contexts with the amount of information that we receive as the team leader. It's also, as the monitor, a good opportunity for you to be able to be abreast with what's happening in your niche. You are the specialist for your niche, whether that's community or aged care or ICU. So being really up front with having attended seminars, conferences, maintained professional contacts, having that opportunity to be able to be really knowledgeable about your area means that that's something that you can put into autopilot, and it allows more brain space for other things to be able that you're monitoring. This is also a really good opportunity to develop relationships people you can rely on. Great relationship with an after hours coordinator, with your ward clerk, with your orderlies, with other people in your world is going to be really important for you to be able to monitor effectively, stream the information and make great decisions. Next, as the gatekeeper of information, you are also the disseminator. So you've collected a great deal of information from a variety of sources. Now you need to be the one to make the decision about who gets what bit of information. What will you transmit to your subordinates and what will you withhold? This is where you communicate potentially really useful information to your colleagues and team. Some of your information will be factual and some of it will be subjective and intuitive and vague, some of it hearsay, And some of the information that you collect will be completely false. What one nurse may tell you about what's going on may be completely false. But most of the time, you will be given a lot of data. Sometimes you'll make good calls with that data, and sometimes you'll make bad calls about what to do with that data. But you live and you learn more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. So don't worry too much about that. But it is a situation where, as opposed to when you're dealing with a patient and you're being given data about that patient, what are their observations, how are they mobilising, where should they be at, what variances are they displaying, what's the doctors saying, then you make assessments about that and you implement a solution. You are doing the exact same in the team leader with disseminating that information, just with different sources of data. So, for example, when I was a manager at the emergency department, we got a call from a tertiary referral hospital saying that there was a crisis in the community and they were activating their emergency management plan, which meant that they were transferring all of their Cat 4s and 5s to us, a private emergency department. Now, I was the holder of that information, and it was essential that I disseminated that information to a great many people. Doctors, ward receptionists, the owner of the facility, the nurses, the after-hours coordinator, the orderlies and theatre. Had I not given all of that information, they would not have given me their specialist knowledge, because I had a general knowledge about what was going to be. But once I disseminated that, then they were able to say to me, for example, the ward receptionists, Nicole, we're a private emergency, these are public patients, what do I do about financial consent? And so then I had to solve that problem. I went to the doctors and said, this is what's happening. And they said, right, then this is how we're going to manage the triage differently to the way we would normally do it. Come to me with these patients, come to this doctor with those patients. When I went to the nurses, they were like, right, well, this is the physical space that we've got. If we get cardiac patients, we're not going to have enough telemetry. And so they gave me their specialist knowledge once I disseminated the information to them. Now, in terms of this, then if you're feeling like this is not an area where you're feeling particularly strong, then it's important to develop some skills in team briefings, how you disseminate information, how you brief teams in those short, succinct data chunks. No one needs the story, they just need to know what's happening and why. Also a really good opportunity to develop something perhaps like a scrum on your ward and the skills that you have around that informal handover time where you call everybody together and go, right, things have changed. This is what it's going to look like now. What have we got to do? Where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? Right, let's share, reallocate, move on. So when you're the holder of that disseminated information, then you need to develop ways that work for you to be able to deliver that. Now, sometimes you hold the responsibility of being the spokesperson for the department when you are the gatekeeper of the information. So you're the gatekeeper of the information in, but sometimes you're the gatekeeper of information out. You're responsible and sometimes obliged to transmit information to people who are outside your department. Now, as a team leader in a hospital, for example, that might be you need to transmit to people to like recovery, emergency, your after-hours coordinator, to patients, visitors and their families about what's happening. You're expected to serve outside your department, sometimes outside of your clinical niche. So, for example, consider a time when your nurse manager is away and you are now expected to attend the bed meeting that happens every day in the hospital at 9 o'clock. Now, your role in that is to transmit information about your current ward status. You're a 30-patient medical ward. You've got 2 patients that are definitely going home today, 5 maybes. They're all trial avoids. So we won't know until probably around 2 p.m. and the other doctor doesn't do ward rounds until about 6 o'clock and he may or may not discharge some more. So now you've been the spokesperson for the ward to let the rest of the hospital know that you may have 10 beds, 2 beds possible, 5 beds maybe, and another couple that you think is a speculation. So then the rest of the hospital can know what to do with that, if anything, and you've acted as the spokesperson. Sometimes as the nun, as the figurehead, you may need to attend a heads of department meeting in your nurse manager's stead. And again, you will be responsible for being the spokesperson about what you guys are doing, what you're all about, what your wins and successes are, what your problems are. So if you feel like this is an area of weakness for you, then to be effective in this role, then make sure you know how to represent your department at a meeting. Understand how meetings work, what the agenda is. Don't be afraid to speak, but know when it is appropriate. You may also want to develop some skills in delivering presentations. While when you go to the bed management meeting, it's not necessarily that you're going to get your PowerPoint out, but it is still a way for you to present information and how you're going to present that in data chunks rather than all of the what ifs and the maybes and the stories and this doctor, how to present that information effectively so people are given data that they know what to do with. Also, this is a really good opportunity for you to know about the 10 national safety and quality health service standards in Australia, because if you're acting as a spokesperson, then you're acting as a specialist for you representing your patients. And so you want to know about those 10 standards and what that means for your wards in terms of falls and managing the deteriorating patient and the possibility of wrong side of surgery and what you guys are doing in that context. So they're our next three. Informational. You act as the monitor, the disseminator and the spokesperson. Our four last areas are in the decisional roles. So you are the ultimate person to make decisions. You're the senior authoritative person and you assume responsibilities for all of your department's actions. As the monitor or the nerve centre role suggested that only you can fully understand complex situations, then it follows also that you can be the only one that can deliver the actions that follow from that information that you hold. Sometimes it can involve particularly difficult value trade-offs, and nothing more truer can be said from a nursing team leader, that sometimes you are battling that decision between what's best for your patient and what's best for the hospital from the business, and that can feel, from a value point of view, quite compromising. So you are the person that has to make and own those decisions. And you do that in a couple of ways. You actually act as an entrepreneur. You participate in a role where you create and control change. This means solving problems, generating new ideas and implementing them. You are the initiator and the designer of solutions, and sometimes solutions on the fly. You look for your role is potential for you. In your role, you look for constant potential for problems and initiating that action. And as the manager's delegate, you look for opportunities that are both best for the business and best for the patient. It is the opportunity for you to ensure that you deliver on best practice. So, for example, there was a nurse that I worked with who did night duty, and she did it with her sister, and they have found a situation where the nurse calls on this night duty were absolutely out of control. And so they did 7 in a row. Second night duty, the exact same thing happened, just nurse calls out of control. So the third night they counted them. On the fourth night they came in and thought, I think it's got something to do with all the patients wanting to be toileted. So they came in an hour and a half, fed, watered, toileted all of their patients before their night duty and counted again. And they reduced their nurse calls to a third of what it was. Did the same thing as this on the 6th night, and on the 7th night they called their nurse manager and said, we've come up with this really good idea. It saved us heaps of time. We've been far more efficient with doing everything else, and the patients are a lot more settled. So they created this great idea, this entrepreneurial, although it was it's an entrepreneurial idea, and they executed it beautifully. So this is an area when you're an entrepreneur that's all about change management, and it's all about quality improvement. So what about change, even though they seem like little changes, they can make a really, really big impact. And it's about balancing the needs of the business and with the needs of the patient. In this decisional capability, you will also be the disturbance handler. The It means that you have to be responsible for managing and scanning for opportunities for problems. Where the entrepreneur scanned for opportunities for improvement, you now scan for opportunities for problems. So it's not a voluntary change that has happened, it is a change that you're forced to make. You've hit an unexpected roadblock. Now you'll recall earlier that as the monitor or the nerve centre, you were the one that's constantly scanning and keeping the information. Well, now you've hit a roadblock with that information. As the generalist, your people hold the specific details and they're the ones that are integral in making decisions about how to move forward, but you're the best positioned to make a decision holistically and to calm that disturbance and therefore obliged to assume responsibility for dealing with it. You're responsible for balancing this disturbance with stability. That is your goal, and it's about making short-term adjustments to restore equilibrium, long-terms for another day. Now consider you're managing an operating theatre and you get a call from the obstetric ward to say a cord prolapse is on its way. A classic example of a disturbance. So now you look around, you scan your 12 operating theatres and they're all full. So you now have your short-term strategies, your short-term adjustments is scanning for which theatre hasn't quite started or which one is just about to finish. And whichever one, you turf them from the operating theatre, get them into the operating theatre, get that case done and then restore order. Your long-term strategy is that also that you know that the activity in this operating theatre has grown, particularly emergency cases, and there has been discussion about starting an operating theatre dedicated to emergencies. Now your short-term adjustment is getting it sorted now. Your long-term adjustment is not going, geez, this is a good example of how that emergency theatre is going to be useful, but I can't help you today. So I'll escalate it, send an email to my manager and better luck next time. That cord prolapse has to be dealt with now. Short-term adjustments, deal with it what you can, get it sorted, deal with the long-term adjustments later. Now this is an area often where your disturbance may not be an event, it may be in between people, where two of your staff have had a disagreement, an argument, a problem. So in this role, if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable in this role, conflict resolution is essential. And managing your emotions in times like this is essential. If you fall apart when the phone rings with the cord prolapse, and because you're so stressed about this emergency situation, then you need to develop your skills in dealing with those emotions. Now the next one is the resource allocator. In your decisional capacity, you are the resource allocator. Sometimes you give it, and sadly, sometimes you take it away. But it involves funding, it involves managing staff and hospital resources, human and material. So you are responsible as the nurse manager's delegate. You are looking after her budget and her job. And when you don't manage it well, then the person that carries the can is your manager. So when you decide that you're not going to send casuals home or agencies home or have extra staff even though you've had 10 unplanned discharges and you use almost all of the week's resources on that shift, then you are making a very difficult resource allocation for the rest of the week where those hours have to be made up. So it is incumbent upon you to be able to make a decision that is morally and ethically and financially right for your patients. When you were a nurse and you were looking after your 4 post-op patients, you had the luxury of being able to only worry about really one resource, and that was yours. You were going to spend 5 hours with your very, very acute patient and 3 hours with your other 3, because that's the resource allocation that you determined was right for your allocation for patients. When you're the team leader, you now have to think about not only the 30 patients in the ward that you're managing for the team leading, but also all of the patients that will come in for that month, because you're using the resources for those people. So you have a far greater responsibility for resource allocation than you did yesterday when you had 4 patients. If this is an area then of weakness, then having a really good understanding of some of key performance indicators will decode this for you. So understanding why we worry about work hours per patient day, or how much drugs, medical supplies were allocated. What can you control and what can't you? Decode all of that for yourself so it's not as stressful. You are also a negotiator. Surprise, surprise. And this is your final role in this team leading gig. When you are essentially negotiating constantly, and you need to take part in and direct important negotiations with your team, your department and your organisation. Sophisticated team leaders are highly skilled negotiators, and they make it a fundamental part of how they operate. Essentially, you are selling things to people all the time that they don't want to do. You're selling to them why they will take an extra patient load. You will sell to them why you need to redistribute the allocations, considering someone's running around like a hairy goat and they're reading Woman's Day in the nurse's tea room. You're selling to people about why you're going to get a doctor to take a different approach than what he or she wants to, so that you can take something that you think is going to be better for the team. You're selling to someone why they can be team leader tonight for night duty when they loathe team leading. You're selling to somebody about why they want to do a double shift because the patient in bed 9 has just had a post-operative delirium and now need to be specialed or not. You're selling to somebody why they need to take their tea break now and not in their own sweet time. So you are constantly negotiating, and it's integral to this role. You are the spokesperson and the resource allocator. So you're resource trading in this all of the time. You're calling on those leadership skills we talked about at the beginning, as well as your liaison skill. That goodwill that you've developed through authentic relationships and authentic leaderships comes to pass now when you want them to do something that they just don't want to do. You're making promises, trade-offs and concessions so that you can cope with whatever disturbance has emerged. Now, in this situation, there are a lot of theories about it, and we will actually cover negotiations in a future webinar so that you can grasp those essential skills so that you can get better at this integral part of the process. But those are the 10 leadership roles that you take on when you take on this leadership gig as the team leader. 3 interpersonal, the figurehead and the leader and the liaison. 3 informational, you are the gatekeeper of information as the monitor, the disseminator and the spokesperson. And you are the ultimate decision maker, and you do that through entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator and the negotiator. As always, I've got some links here, 10 TL skills on my website that holds a lot more information about those skills and areas where you may want to develop further, and some links to some resources that may be helpful for you.
Nicole, thank you very much for a really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I was trying to work out where I was on the continuum. If you're attending the session live and you would like to ask Nicole a question, just click on the question mark icon, type in the little box and hit send, and that will go through to Nicole. So I found it interesting when you were talking about when you first, your first management job, and there was an expectation that, one day you were a worker and the next day you were a manager and you had all the resources you needed to do that.
Mm.
And it took you a while to work out your own style.
Mm.
And that's something we don't teach.
No.
Like we model off other people that we think does it well. But part of this webinar series, and certainly part of the work that you do, is trying to preempt the sensation that you feel when, you're sitting there in the role and it's all yours, and how do I do that now?
Mm. And it's incredibly stressful because when you're new to this role, you're in a constant flux of self-doubt, feeling like you're a fraud. and you have no business holding this role, because particularly when we're new and we've watched other people do it and they do it with such ease. And then you turn up and it's clunky and you take forever to do things and you're frightened about every decision that you make and you're just consumed with that notion of self-doubt. And it does make you start this shoulding. I should be doing this and I should be behaving this way and I should be able to make this decision and I should have known that this disturbance was going to pop out of nowhere. And it is a situation where it is, you learn by trial and error, and that's okay. There's no other way to learn it.
Mm-hmm. And the issue is you can get to a point where you don't make any decision.
Exactly.
So therefore, you've got these people looking at you with an expectation and you do nothing. So you're either going to get hassled from those above you or hassled from those below you. And that level of stress leads you to make less decisions. So you end up with, a totally ineffectual unit because the poor darling who finds themselves in the management role comfortably can't make a call.
And once you let those fears really take over you and you start the stress ramps, and that's evident, then those people who are working for you look up to you, whether you think that they do or not. And they go, oh, God, if the team leader can't handle it, what chance have I got? It's a real disaster. We really are tail spinning and unravelling here.
Yeah.
So, not letting the worm in your head take over and know that it is a journey and a process is okay. But they're not clinical skills that we teach, sadly.
But there are resources available to you.
Indeed.
Hence why we have that website up in front of you, and I would recommend that you go and have a look at the resources that Nicole provides. Exceptional. Nicole, thank you for a great presentation.
My pleasure.
To everyone who's listening, I wish you an absolutely exceptional day, and I look forward to seeing you online at another webinar very soon. Goodbye.